Welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. This episode is continuing my coverage of the special election for Rhode Island's first congressional district, where I interview all the candidates seeking the seat. Joining me today is the Republican nominee for the seat, Gerry Leonard, who is a retired Marine colonel and a resident of Jamestown. Gerry, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Ray, and I like the name for your podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and it's a pleasure to have you on. My first question is, why do you want to represent Rhode Island in Congress?
Ray, appreciate the question. I want to represent Rhode Island in Congress for a few different reasons. One, I don't like the direction our country's going right now. I absolutely believe we could be doing better for working families of Rhode Island and across the country. The inflation tax that I think is induced by our federal government is affecting our pocketbooks. It's affecting us at the grocery stores. It's affecting us at the gas station. We could be doing better, particularly economically. And I think a second one, we could be doing better on the education front. So that's at the national level. One is as a lifelong Rhode Islander, growing up here and a 13th generation Rhode Islander, I long haven't been happy with a one party rule, which is essentially what we have here in the state of Rhode Island. And I absolutely believe we need more balance in our government. Well, that's certainly not what a federal job would do. I'd like to be part of a process to bring back some type of balance in Rhode Island's political structure. And finally, Ray, the divisiveness that I'm seeing in our country, and I think we're all seeing it, and it's coming from both ends of the political spectrum, the extreme ends of both ends. I just think most Americans, like myself, probably like you, we live in the middle. We might be a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, but that's where we live. And I think we need to, quite frankly, start working together, cooperating, seeing more sense of bipartisanship. And quite frankly, Ray, I'd like to use this expression as I think we need to put the civil back in our discourse.
And before we dive into certain policy goals you have and some relevant topics relating to this race and the job that you're running for, I do want to talk about the composition of the seat. So for the folks just tuning into this special election cycle, the first congressional district is basically the eastern side of Rhode Island. It does have parts of Providence, the eastern side, south side, Woonsocket, North Smithfield, Tiverton. Just think the East Bay, pretty much as you head to Massachusetts. And it is a very blue seat. I voted for President Biden in the 2020 election by, I believe, 20 something points, and it hasn't gone red since 1992, which was when Ron Makeley won re-election for, I believe, a third and final term. And the last time it was close was 2010 when John Laughlin ran against Cicilline. How will your candidacy be different and end that trend of the seat being blue?
Well, I believe in my heart of heart, Rhode Island is looking for change, and quite frankly, looking for leadership in Washington, D.C., independent thinking in Washington, D.C. I think and when I talk leadership, I'm talking about someone, and we're using the slogan, principles above politics. We're talking about making decisions down in Washington, D.C. that affect American families. And people that take those votes and make those decisions need to understand the consequences. And they need to remember and never forget who sent them there. It's a privilege to represent Rhode Islanders down there. And that's what I hope to be doing on the 8th of November, is representing First District. I understand the makeup of the state. I understand quite frankly, the political map. But I'd like to call myself a New England Yankee Republican, and get down to Washington, D.C., quite frankly, and bring common sense to the halls of Congress, bring bipartisanship back. And I think that requires leadership to do that, and folks with the backbone to be able to stand up for themselves, independently think, and make decisions not for themselves or not for their party, but quite frankly for the people that they're representing.
And just to clarify that term for the New York Yankee Republican,
No,
because
I didn't say New.
oh no,
Ray, I didn't say New
Yankee
York Yankee.
Republican.
I'll never get elected if I say New York Yankee.
Yankee Republican. So just to clarify that, is that like kind of like a Rockefeller Republican, like more like socially liberal and fiscally conservative? Just want to get a temperature on what that means.
Yeah, I am definitely so philosophical. It's New England Yankee Republican.
New England Yankee Republican. My apologies.
Kind of in the same vein is my hero growing up, which was John Chafee, not to be confused with Link Chafee, but John Chafee, his father. I think he epitomized what a New England Yankee Republican is. And I recall growing up, probably when I was about your age, he used to get beaten up a little bit by the Reagan administration for crossing across the aisle and coming up with solutions with both parties that helped Rhode Islanders, and that was his focus, which I intended to be mine. So please don't ever say the Yankees as the New York Yankees. My God,
New England
I'll
Yankee.
be run out of Rhode Island in 2 seconds.
Got it. Actually, one of my headphones is kind of a little bit dead, so I think I misheard you, but I appreciate the clarification. So now looking at the economy, because you did touch upon it in one of your earlier answers, you want to focus on those pocketbook issues, especially as inflation, although it's gone down compared to last year, the effect is still lingering. So if in Congress, what policies would you support to reduce the inflation, the impacts of inflation?
Well, I think a lot. And let me go back to your last question to tie into this question, Ray. I'm a Republican. I didn't grow up a Republican. I grew up in a Democrat household. My father was a Democrat and elected to the North Kingstown School Committee. So that's where I come from. And my political maturation took place while I served in the military for 30 years. And it wasn't the institution of the Marine Corps. It happened to be going around the globe, seeing how other countries operate, see how they work, see how they operate politically, economically. And I quite frankly started shifting my political thoughts that I'm a big fan of some of the fundamentals that Ronald Reagan espoused, which is a limited federal government and a government that's not involved in every component of our life. What I'd call federal overreach, because I think Rhode Islanders and Americans know how to live their lives better than bureaucrats and politicians. So that's where I'm coming from. And then so when we talk of limited government, I do believe we spend way too much. So I would clarify I would define myself as a fiscal conservative and moderate on quite frankly social issues. And I think the most important issues when I'm talking to voters right now is the Bidenomics isn't working for working families. We see it, like I told you, when you go to the grocery store. I met a lady yesterday that told me her grocery bills have doubled. So we can say that inflation's come down, but I think the accumulation of inflation is still built into our system. And I think it was caused by, quite frankly, overspending in Washington, D.C. I think it was caused, quite frankly, by this White House that I would describe. They took their win in 2020 as a mandate when this country was kind of evenly split politically. It wasn't a Ronald Reagan landslide. Ronald Reagan had a mandate. I'm not sure this was a mandate, right?
So just kind of the tie back though into the overall question, just so I have it correctly, one of the policies you'd support to reduce the effects of inflation is lowering spending?
It would be reducing spending, and the Simpson-Bowles Commission that stood up under President Obama came up with a number of recommendations, quite frankly, to reduce overlap within bureaucracies in Washington, D.C., where we have maybe duplication of spending. And we can certainly, implementing some of those recommendations would certainly help reduce what I think is overspending in Washington, D.C.
And now going off of that part of the conversation, because some Republicans look at areas like Social Security and Medicare as places that they want to do cuts. I know that's it differs from Republican to Republican, but there are some national Republicans who are under the impression that it's going to sunset or that you need to privatize those programs. So are those areas that you would favor cuts in, or is there any other areas?
Ray, no, can we unpack this whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Take your time.
Very briefly. So right now, our national debt to GDP ratio is about 120, 121. Most economists think it needs to be somewhere between 60 and 90. You are going to carry debt because you need to invest in infrastructure and other things, but the ratio is way out of balance. One of the ways you do that is improving the GDP. And right now we're hovering around 2%. You improve the GDP. One of the ways we can improve the GDP is unleashing all our natural resources that reside in America, and quite frankly, focus on energy independence. That's one way. So that's on improving the GDP to fix that ratio, that imbalance, if you will. And then I think you would start addressing spending. Now, to your question on our annual spending, I have an aunt that's 85 years old. She just sold her home because she couldn't afford to pay the mortgage payments anymore. She's trying to raise a 15-year-old grandson. And all she has to live off is a Social Security check. I am not going to Washington, D.C. to tell my aunt I'm taking her Social Security check away. So we need to protect Social Security, and then we need to figure out a way to preserve it for long into the future. And again, you fix your GDP and you start operating about 4 to 5%, and you start fixing a lot of the ailments that affect our spending, our overspending, if you will. So that's certainly something that I want to be part of, and figure out how we get there, and working across both sides of the aisle, because I think most politicians want to do the right thing in Washington, D.C. So Social Security is not on the table in my book. Neither is Medicare, Medicaid. And the most important part of that is you don't make a promise with people and break that promise, as quite frankly happened here in the state of Rhode Island with the teachers, the firemen, and the police officers. Well, that was a state issue. I know my sister right now, who's a teacher in North Kingstown, is going to be working 5 to 8 years longer than she had anticipated because of what the Democrat status quo in the Rhode Island did to her pension system.
And then just before we move on to the next topic, because you obviously getting the GDP up, I understand that part, improving the economy, utilizing natural resources, but even that's going to take time in order to increase, in order for our budget situation to be on a better track. So in the meantime, are there any other areas, not Social Security or Medicare, that you would favor a cut on?
Well, I don't agree with the growing any of the bureaucracies like what we're going to try to do with the IRS. And you and I both know, and I think most people know, once you start growing bureaucracies in different agencies in Washington, D.C., they have a habit of staying around forever. And that's not good for America, particularly if you believe, like I do, philosophically, the government doesn't need to be in every component of our life.
Moving on to another key issue that's present in the special election cycle is the issue of reproductive rights. That's one that's going to be talked about not only in this cycle, but even 2024 and beyond. Do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice?
Ray, going back to what I said, the divisiveness in our country, I'm going to avoid the labels on that. What I will tell you is I'm not going to Washington, D.C. to support a national abortion ban. Rhode Island's codified its own abortion laws into the state. While I personally don't agree with late-term partial birth and infanticide, I think we show more humanity on the battlefield with the enemies we try to keep alive when they're wounded than that. But that being said, it's a state issue. It's a 10th Amendment issue, and I do not want to see the federal government dictating from Washington, D.C., what Rhode Islanders ought to be doing.
So in terms of legislation, since you said it's a state issue, if there's legislation introduced that would codify Roe on the federal level, how would you vote on something like that?
Well, I think that was the question I think you started off with, Ray. Again, I will go down to protect Rhode Island rights. I will go down to protect our civil rights and Rhode Island rights. And I absolutely believe there's needs to be a line drawn between what the federal government is allowed to do and what state governments ought to be doing. I think a government that governs least governs best, and I think also a government that is more tied to the people, like the local town committees, like the state government here. I think that's a better way to govern.
And, if you're in Congress, there's likely going to be pressure from some of the Republicans that are more further right on this issue. They'll probably say, hey, Congressman Leonard, we need your vote for the 15-week abortion ban. You would vote against that, just to clarify?
I'm an independent thinker, right? And philosophically, it needs to stay with the state.
Got it. Moving on to, I have a couple of lightning round questions to get through some topics a little bit quickly.
Lightning rod, Ray. There's no
Yes,
such thing as lightning rod.
there is on this
Everything I
show. We
use out of
gotta,
context.
all right, maybe not exactly one word, but try to keep these short so we can get through some topics quickly. So banning members of Congress from trading stocks, do you support or oppose that idea?
I think we need a number of political reforms in our country, that being one. I will tell you, John Tester teed up some ideas, the Democrat senator from Montana, that I think we ought to take a hard look on. So yes, I don't think that, Ray, but I also believe we need to have term limits, and I will also.
Okay, we're going to get to the term limits, but I just want to get to these real quickly. So you support the banning stock trading, just correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. This one I'll let you elaborate a little bit because I know you've been asked it a lot on previous interviews. A national ban on assault-style weapons such as the AR-15. Do you support or oppose that?
Ray, I took an oath to support and defend our Constitution, and that was protecting our civil liberties. That is one of our civil liberties. So whether or not the issues that, as a parent, because I have 4 kids, they're all grown now, but I never would not have wanted to send my kid to school worrying whether or not they're going to come home. So I do think we need to work cooperatively, both sides of the aisle, to come up with things that make sense. And I do think guns don't kill people. People kill people. And I'll be clear on that. Absolutely how guns work. It's a person that does the shooting. We have a mental health crisis in this country, and we need to provide the resources to address that mental health crisis.
But in the on the assault weapons ban, that issue, you would oppose it, if it sounds like?
Ray, I believe in our rights under the Second Amendment, period.
Okay.
And it's not what we're talking about, firearms that kill people, unfortunately. It's people.
So you would oppose that legislation?
Absolutely.
Got it. This one might be a little bit tougher, but no, we're going to get through it. So out of the current field of the
Ray, you're good at this, all right?
Thank you. So out of the current field of the 2024 Republican presidential candidates, who do you see yourself supporting in a Rhode Island presidential primary?
Ray, the only thing I'm concerned right now is what I can control, and that's 2023. That's November 7th. I'm out meeting and greeting voters, finding out what the issues are, and I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how things are going to shake out over the next year. So let me focus on what I can control, and that's my own campaign.
We'll let that one go for now, but in March 2024, I'm going to follow up with you on that after Super Tuesdays. So what's one committee you'd like to be on if elected to Congress?
Education and Workforce Committee, to me, is if I'm in a position like that, I think I do the most benefit to the state of Rhode Island, which is why I'm going down there to help. I absolutely believe that based on my 30 years in the service, that the House Armed Services Committee would make a ton of sense. I'm also realistic. I'm a freshman. I'll be a freshman congressman. But I absolutely think the education and workforce would benefit Rhode Island most of all, and perhaps a subcommittee that's dealing with housing.
Now, moving on from the lightning round, these ones you can elaborate as much as you want now on the answers. You did mention you favor term limits, which that was actually my question right after this section. So how many terms do you think it should be?
I don't know what the right answer is on that, right? To be frank, I don't know what that answer is. Here's what I know. I'm 58 years old, and I plan on being fully retired, playing golf, hunting, or fishing on my 70th birthday. So if you do the math, that would be 10 years. That's five terms for a rep. I haven't thought much. I do think there needs to be term limits on the Senate side. I think we've seen things, both Republicans and Democrats recently, that physically look like they might have some challenges. And I think it's good for our country. I don't think our founding fathers wanted us to become lifetime politicians and sit in Washington, D.C. or in a state house forever. I think it's good that we have change. And I think it's what our founding fathers wanted. What I hope is that we have there's a Roman general named Cincinnatus. So I wish we had more Cincinnatuses out here, that they serve, they do their service to the people that want them to do that service, and then they go home and they go farm or they go do whatever it may do. For me, again, it's golfing, fishing, or hunting.
So this one's more of a recent topic, and technically more of a political one, depending on how you look at it. But right now, it sounds like the House Republicans are going to move forward with the idea of impeaching President Joe Biden. Kevin McCarthy announced that he's opening the impeachment inquiry. There's not going to be a vote on it. It's just going to go right into it. And this is going to be a tough one from some of those Republicans that are in Biden won seats, and especially this seat as well. So where do you stand on this conversation in terms of impeaching Biden?
Just to separate two, it's the inquiry. So it's a gathering of the facts. I don't think anybody, and I've said this about the former president, no one's above the law, and people need to be held accountable. And I do think there's a constitutional duty of Congress, both the House and the Senate, to provide a check and balance on the executive branch. It's what our founding fathers wanted, and I absolutely believe our Constitution is perhaps the best and most thoughtful Constitution in the world.
So you support the inquiry?
I do.
And well, I guess looking ahead, if based on the current reasons they're opening this inquiry, if there were a vote to impeach the president, are you going to wait and see what the inquiry shows, or do you have any idea of where you would stand on that?
I just hope the process is as transparent as possible, and let's see what the facts, what comes out of the facts. And again, Ray, I don't have a crystal ball. Let's both you and I and quite frankly the American public see where the inquiry takes us.
Got it. Moving on to an international topic I want to ask you about, especially because you have had a life in service. So I really want to get your perspective on this topic. So the U.S. has done some recent efforts when it comes to supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia, such as sending money, sending cluster munitions, and allowing F-16 fighter jets that are American made from other countries to be given to Ukraine. What are your thoughts on the U.S.'s current approach? And feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, so Ray, a few things with respect to Ukraine. I one, and be very clear, and I think most Americans would agree with both Republicans and Democrats when they say Putin is a thug, and the invasion of Ukraine was a clear violation of international law. And I believe the United States ought to be that shining city on a hill and do the right thing. So I think our initial response is the right approach. And however, that being said, the president of the United States is responsible for our foreign policy. And as a military person, you need to define what the end state is, or what the strategic goal is, so you know how to reach that strategic goal. I don't think any American, including myself, wants to see another endless war with a blank check that goes in and in and in and in. The other thing I would say on that is there needs to be accountability measures in place with how U.S. money is being spent vis-a-vis Ukraine. I saw in Afghanistan a level of corruption that money went into Afghanistan, somehow made it into the hands and pocketbooks of people we probably didn't want to have it in, and now that money is sitting in Dubai and Qatar somewhere in multi-million-dollar mansions over there. We don't want to see that with Ukraine. There needs to be accountability measures in place to audit how our money's being used and spent there. The other thing, and the third thing I would tell you, is we need to put pressure on our partners in this thing, that they are investing, if you will, or providing the resources to the same level that we are right now. But at the end of the day, we need to avoid another endless war. And the best way to do that is for the president of the United States to tell all of us what's the end game here, what's the end state. And I've said this a few times on the radio, and I love the quote, Lewis Carroll quote: "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." And we need to know where we're going.
So moving forward, if you're elected to Congress, in terms of sending additional aid, you want to make sure it's audited so you know exactly where every dollar is going, and obviously that there's a clear game plan for the end game with this war.
There needs to be, and the United States needs to take a leadership role on the outcome of this war. So define what the end state is or what the strategic goal is, and figure how we're going to get there, and step up to the plate and take on a leadership role in this thing rather than China or Saudi Arabia, which I've seen recently. The last thing, I do believe we need to look at this war in the global context, and China's watching. And China is our greatest threat outside of our own borders. I don't think it's the existential threat. I absolutely believe our national debt is our existential threat. It's supposed to double by 2053. And I am concerned about the nation and the country that we're leaving for our grandkids and great-grandkids.
Speaking of China, that Ukraine is just one international topic that is, on the radar of the United States right now. Another one is regarding Taiwan and China. How do you feel about the U.S.'s response to that situation at the moment?
How would you define our response at this moment, Ray? I mean,
it's a bit of a tricky one, but I do want to let you elaborate, because there's some folks who are very adamant that Taiwan is its own country and that the United States should be standing 10 toes down with Taiwan and pushing back on China's, I guess, attempt to try to take that country. And obviously, I believe it was Anthony Blinken who said recently, he had said a controversial statement. And then obviously there's other aspects of this conversation that, has drawn headlines, like Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So it's kind of a, I don't want to give the wrong answer, but I trust your judgment more on this if you want to give any of your thoughts on this.
Very ambiguous on how, and I think strategically that's a smart thing to do. I am concerned with respect to China for 30 years. Sometimes I think they're playing chess and we're playing checkers. But they have been building artificial islands throughout the South China Sea. Last I read, 70% of the world's trade is flowing through that part of the world. It's incredibly important economically to not just us and China and Taiwan, Japan. It's important to the world. And freedom of navigation. We ought to be enforcing freedom of navigation. And we ought not to let the Chinese or the Chinese Communist Party bully us with respect to freedom of navigation in those waters. We need to maintain it. I do think some of the things we've done, Ray, I do think the CHIPS Act is a step in the right direction. I do think we need to bring back some of our, let's just call them strategic manufacturing, back to the United States. And we need to take steps there. I think the CHIPS Act is a step in the right direction. We could be doing a lot more and faster.
And I just want to clarify earlier, because I was referring to the statement Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, made. Now that I remember, it was that he said that the U.S. does not support Taiwan's independence. So that was one of the controversial headlines recently regarding the ongoing situation and the U.S.'s view on it. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for those watching, just so they were like, okay, Ray's got his facts correctly. So my final question, moving away from politics, I love to ask this one at the end to keep the tradition going. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Ray, I'm going to give you a couple. When you study the history of Rhode Island, I think the separation of church and state that originated in my mind's eye in Rhode Island, and what Roger Williams left the puritanical tyranny of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to bring, quite frankly, religious freedoms. I think all Rhode Islanders ought to be proud of our history. But on a lighter note, food. We have wonderful food here, and the finest chowder in the world is Rhode Island chowder, which is the clear chowder. And my favorite spot is in the 1st District. It's Amaril's Fish and Chips. And I love their chowder, and I recommend anybody else go out there and try that.
I appreciate you actually bringing that up, because I was going to ask a quick follow-up if you had any go-to spots in CD1. That's all the questions I had. Gerry, thank you so much for giving me your time for this. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Ray, I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you next time.